Welcome to the EntrePastors Podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors Podcast on YouTube. I'm John Sanders. I'm one of the co-founders of EntrePastors, and we've got an awesome episode coming your way right now. I'm going to have a conversation with a friend of mine by the name of Justin Johnson, and we're going to talk about having dominion in the area of our wealth, among other arenas of life. But did you know that God's people were created for dominion? To rule over, to fill the earth, to subdue it, to multiply. And sadly, for many Christians, their life does not look like a life that is being lived out in dominion. There's a lot of passivity, and that really applies, I think, sadly, much of the time to pastors, especially when it comes to the area of their financial life. They're not winning. They're not taking dominion. They're not walking in success in this arena of their life. And in this conversation with Justin, you're going to hear him talk about how that's absolutely possible for God's people, including pastors, to really walk in this realm of dominion, including in their financial arena. So, great conversation coming your way. I'm so thankful you're tuning in and joining us for this episode. Without any further ado, let's cut to this interview with my friend Justin Johnson. Here we go. Well, Justin, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the EntrePastors Podcast, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Good to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I think as we were connecting here briefly before we hit record today, you mentioned and reminded me that we got connected through a mutual friend, a former coaching client of mine that connected us and said that there was some intersection of our passions and our interests. And so anytime I get someone on the podcast, that's really what I want to find is how can we, what's the angle on their story? Everyone has a story, and I can almost turn anybody's story into something that's a lesson that benefits our community and our audience. But this is not a hard one. As you and I were talking through, I was like, oh, this will be really easy because so much of what you're passionate about is a big part of what we deal with our community. So I'll set it up, and then I'm going to toss you some softballs and you can just start crushing them out of the park here. But for anyone listening to this, if this is one of the first episodes you've ever tuned into, or you're a newer listener to the EntrePastors Podcast, I want to just briefly remind you what we're about. And we are so done with the narrative of the starving pastor, this idea of a pastor that's living in poverty because that's just how it is. You said yes to serving God, and therefore, since you are in ministry, you get to be broke. There's so much that is unhealthy and broken about that mindset, so many unhealthy implications. And so we think it's a good thing for pastors to not be broke. We help pastors not be broke. And our answer to, well, where do you get not broke from, is not by helping you get more money out of the offering plate necessarily. We do think you're worthy of being paid because we read that in Scripture. So we're not anti-pastors getting paid. One thing, Justin, I'll just say this to you, but I'm saying it to the broad audience. Sometimes people misunderstand the message and the mission of EntrePastors. I've heard people say, oh, that's really cool. You guys help pastors go start businesses so that their churches don't have to pay them. I get it. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. That's not at all what we're saying. I'm totally okay with a pastor being paid if they're in vocational ministry. I'm just not okay with a pastor being broke because they're in vocational ministry. And so our solution is not how do we help you get more out of the offering plate? It's we can help you go out into the marketplace where, by the way, there just so happens to be a lot of ministry to be had out there anyway. And the ceiling on your earning potential is virtually lifted once you are in that role of an entrepreneurial business owner. You can build it to as big as you need to build it. And you're not going to have a board looking over your shoulder going, you can't make that much because you're in ministry. Like, how could we ever justify paying a pastor, $60,000 a year? So anyway, I say all that to kind of remind our audience who we are and what we're about. So Justin, tell us a little bit about what you do, and then this will be a great jumping point to really dive into the conversation today.
Yeah, I mean, kind of to segue off what you just said, I liked your point about, pastors feel like they got to be like poor or something. That perspective has extended, in American culture, for whatever reason, to the people in the pews as well. And the irony there is Well, like if I guess if both everybody's going to get what they want. If they all if the people in the pews want to be poor and the pastor wants to be poor, then everybody's going to get what they want, and we're not going to send any missionaries or build any buildings. So along those lines, I am here to be the hopefully the antidote to that perspective in a different way. You are in your sphere. We founded Dominion Wealth Strategists, my partner and I. His name's Josiah, to combat the sort of Gnostic remnants in the church that appeal to that, for whatever reason, that silly notion that it's more Christian to be poor than to be wealthy.
Mm.
And the Bible doesn't talk like that. We obviously, like Proverbs says, that blessed is the man who leaves inheritance to his children's children. I've heard certain people construe that to mean something along the lines of, well, you shouldn't be leaving inheritance for your kids, it should be to your grandkids. Well, that's a very hyper literal, very silly way to interpret it. The point is, you should have so much left over that it's going to at least a couple generations after you. And so our goal is to educate first and foremost. That's really why we exist more than anything else. And to hook people in the church up with suitable services and make recommendations for helping them establish a long-term vision for their financial future and to become as financially literate as possible. We want everyone we work with to be the best when it comes to financial literacy, to having a vision, a long-term vision and plan for their goals, and to be able to execute that plan. And that's what we're here for. We're here to make sure that they have that vision, they establish that vision, and also help them with the how. How do you make this happen? And we're with them for the long haul.
Okay, so there's a lot of places I want to peel in here. So first of all, tell me about the name Dominion Wealth. I think I know probably a little bit what's behind that. I love the word Dominion, but why did you guys name it Dominion, and unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, it's an extension of the Dominion mandate in Genesis. God told Adam go take dominion, and that is not just a command that is unique to Adam. That is a command that was given to Adam as a representative of all mankind, specifically men, to go and take dominion over the earth, to rule it. That applies to every sphere, whether that be ministerial or in any type of workplace environment, in the family, in the community, in the public sphere, but of course also in the financial realm. And even along those lines, right now in America, most wealth is held by persons who are degenerates, who have no interest in building the kingdom of God, and actually have strong interest in the opposite direction. If you look at who they donate their money to and the messages they put out in the public, I want that to be the opposite. I want Christians to hold the money. Money is power. Christians should have the power. That might sound very to sort of the cultural Christianity of the last 100 years or so. That might sound terrible, but if you're interested in building the kingdom of God, you shouldn't have a problem with that. Do you want secularists to have money that are trying to groom your children into all sorts of nonsense, or would you rather Christians hold the power, hold the money?
Yeah, and just so you know, I'm right there with you 100% on this. And also, I recognize that what you just said is like record stopping, screeching sound audio that happens in many churches. If you say out loud what you just said, you kind of get that record scratch, or like, like, what did he just say? And
Yeah.
everyone stops and looks at you, because that's really abrasive to say what you just said. We don't act that way in the church. We are meek, we are humble, we are poor, we don't have much, and we're blessed because of it, and we like to be blessed. By the way, I'll let you respond to that, but a while back I put a post out on Facebook. It was kind of a meme that changed my mind meme, and the statement was something to the effect of, the reason many Christians are broke is because they're being led by broke pastors. And so there is that trickle down thing that's there, that it's a
Yeah.
leadership thing. Because we're being led by broke pastors, then we've got a whole congregation. But then it cycles back on the pastors, because now we got a broke congregation saying to the pastor, let's keep you broke as well. So it's a vicious cycle, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is, and to some it would be a shocking message, right? But it is so, and for whatever reason, we've lost aggressive proclamation of the Dominion mandate from the pulpit, for the most part, in the American church. We're seeing a rise of that in certain circles. I think circles you're involved in, circles I'm involved in, and that's why I have my endeavor. You do as well with your business. Um, but it shouldn't be that way. The Christians should be the first to applaud such a message and say, yes, that's what we're here for. Like, again, especially the men. Men, get up, go make some money, go engage in your community, engage in the workforce, engage in whatever that might look like for you. And I really like your angle, honestly, encouraging pastors specifically to be entrepreneurial, because I think that Christians should more and more have a thing that's our own. This is a little bit outside of my, I know this is your message more than mine, but I like what you're saying there, because the other piece of this is I don't know how friendly W-2 jobs are going to be to Christians in the next 20 years.
Sure.
If things continue in the direction they're going, you might be very much unhireable as a Christian in the coming decades. That's
Yeah.
a lot. It's a lot tougher to lose everything or lose your ability to make money, if you will, if you have your own business that is providing a significant value to a bunch of people, particularly other Christians. We should work with each other. We should pursue excellence and work with each other.
What are you finding is some of the big hurdles as you're, spreading this message and trying to, build a business and recruit clients, market this idea to people? Like, where do you find your biggest hurdles in terms of the mindset of Christians?
Um, oh, that's a good question. There's a few different areas, I guess, that come to mind. I will be honest with you. One of the bigger hurdles is actually not with the person that I'm meeting with, but when I say I meet, because our process is to meet with someone and just have like an initial overview. It's kind of meet and greet. We don't have a flagship product. We're not pitching a product per se. I don't have like buy this insurance policy. It's the best. That meeting, the purpose of it is actually for us to learn about whoever we're working with. And we don't really make any recommendations at that time. It's just like, this is who we are, what we do. Now let's learn about you. And we take our notes and we go back and kind of figure some stuff out. One of the significant dangers I've seen, which stinks, is sometimes after that meeting, we'll schedule a follow-up meeting right in a week or 2 weeks later. Sometime in between, in that intervening time, someone, whoever we met with, will talk to a family member or a friend and be like, hey, we're meeting with these guys. They gathered some information. They mentioned a few things. They're really excited to do this or whatever. And they're like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Like you shouldn't be focusing on this kind of thing. And they'll be discouraged away from doing so. Whether it's other different things like, oh, you shouldn't talk to them about building wealth. You should be giving away your money. You shouldn't be talking to them about life insurance because that's profiting off of death of another person. Like I've actually heard that.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, I know. I'm just like, are you serious? Wouldn't it be nice for you to like provide for your wife after you die? That's something that's only been afforded to us in modernity, and it's pretty cheap. Like those types of things. And I think it's because those people's consciences are frankly kind of pricked at the idea of what their friend is doing or acquaintance or, family member. And sometimes they actually cancel the meeting with us, uh, just because I think that it bothers whoever they shared the news with. Um, but the other thing is just people having a hard time making present sacrifices for future gains. Delayed gratification is a tough pill to swallow. And I get it. If you're not accustomed to it, you kind of have to warm up to it. It's a muscle that sort of like grows as you work it out. So that's something that we have to work through too for some people that might be struggling to, because they realize that they're in a tough position because they have debt or because they don't make that much money or whatever. And our goal is just to meet with them and provide them hope and a path forward. But sometimes people just kind of feel like they're in a hopeless place and don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah. You
I'd say those are
go
like
ahead.
the top two. Oh no, I'm just saying those are pretty much the top two. Honestly, most of the people that book meetings with us, like for my purposes, they're actually a lot of them are pretty ready to go, because they resonated so much with our messaging is it's very aggressive, kind of like yours is, and so the it does weed out some people that might have been more likely to be like, no, I don't want to talk to you guys. So we actually like, I will say, most of the people we meet with are just eager to build their future. And so I'm not finding a whole lot of resistance. And usually even some of these trepidations, after some discussion are easily overcome. So I don't want to present it like, oh, everybody I meet with is not not doing anything. Um, they often do, but there are a handful once in a while that have certain types of objections.
Well, I think part of that is because of what you just said. You're being very clear in your messaging, and it's self-eliminating. It's causing those to self-eliminate that are not your people, which is a good thing. We the same with us. Most of the pastors and ministry-minded folks who come to us, very rarely do we get a lot of direct pushback from them. We definitely have some mindset things to overcome and some strategic, like how do you actually go about doing some of these things. But
Yeah,
where I get a much bigger pushback, believe it or not, of all places, it's in like Facebook groups of other pastors. Man, that's where I get lit up talking about some of this stuff. Like that is to me what the hornet's nest of some of these ideas that are just I mean, to be honest, it pisses me off. Like, and then I turn
yeah,
around and laugh about it. But there is like a deep kind of rage inside of me that's like, man, I don't know if it's stupidity, if it's Phariseeism, just working with a mindset that thinks it's they're righteous because of how broke they are, and just that willingness to defend something that doesn't need to be defended. Like it is time to change the system. It's time to like rethink some of these things. So I'm going to keep fighting the fight, but sometimes I wade into those pastor groups on Facebook and come out with a few arrows. So
yeah. And
anyway,
it feels like the story of like if you got a bucket full of crabs and one crab's trying to crawl out of the bucket and all the other crabs are pulling them back down. That reminds me of that kind of scenario where it's like you've got someone that's trying to do better, and because they're moved either due to their conscience or something else, and everyone else is trying to like put all this effort into justifying why you should not try harder to provide for your family. How dare you?
yeah. What I find is exactly that. It's the ones that'll reach out quietly in a private message that they don't want to say it in publicly in the group because they know they're going to get lambasted in there. And the other challenge there that I run into is that I'm sometimes a lot of those groups are private, and you have to, get every post approved by the administrator. And because I've gotten, tattled on by others in the group, that they won't even post my posts anymore, which is really frustrating. So it's, we're going to keep putting the message out to those that have ears and want to hear it. But I think you're doing a good job of that. If you're being aggressive in your, marketing and just the mission that you're on, you're going to get those that are squeamish about it to say, this is not my cup of tea. So I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
about this. You mentioned financial literacy. Why are we such a financially illiterate people? Is that a cultural problem? Is that a church problem? Is that a Christian problem? Like where have we gone off the rails? Why do so many people lack literacy when it comes to financial matters?
That's a good question. I think that for the most part, what I see in the church is representative of what's in the rest of the culture. I don't think Christians are any more financially literate than the rest of the world, at least in America. If there's a difference, it's pretty subtle. So I think that it's more of a cultural issue. Why did that happen? It's really tough to say. I think that we could go into discussion about like market conditions and things like that, and that's possible. I will say this, it is harder to handle your finances wisely today than it would have been, say, 20, 30 years ago when wages were much higher against expenses. It was just easier. You could drive a trash truck and support a family. You can't do that. You could have done that in the 80s or maybe the 90s, but that's no longer the case. So I would also say that today demands not that this is an excuse for not pursuing excellence back at that time, but there is a sense that when we don't have the resistance, right, the something to strive against and times are easy, usually there's a lack of interest to push forward. And so where we are today, we've organically arrived at this place where the same level of effort, or maybe even less, is being put into stewarding our finances properly. And yet, of course, we're not able to, to get anywhere because it's actually harder. And so so there's a regression of how effective the results are. Although I don't know that there's a regression of effort because I think it's kind of always been this way. It's just more like now it's harder. and the same amount of effort's being put into, bettering ourselves.
I have two thoughts going through my mind. The first is when you mention that about it's not just a Christian problem, it's a culture-wide problem. I would agree with that, but then where my mind went was, and how sad is that? Because as Christians, we have access to the Word of God that speaks all kinds of principles about money, directly about finances and building wealth and having dominion and all of that. So like, we ought to be leading the way. We ought to be examples in this, in a culture that is illiterate, about finances. And then the other thought that hit me as you're just talking there, and I'm going to mess this up, probably I'd have to see it in writing, but it's that statement, and I don't even know who said this originally, but something about strong, let's see, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard
Yeah.
times create strong men.
And
It's
then,
that
so, yeah,
cycle. It's that
yeah,
cycle. And I think that's also maybe a little bit to bear on this, is that for many of us in our culture, we've grown up in relatively good times, and it's created soft men that haven't had to think about this. Well, all of a sudden, these these good times have created weak men, and these weak men are creating now hard times that we're starting
yeah.
to reap the fruit of. And so it's causing some of us to have to look around and go, wait a minute, we got to do something different. So I don't know to what degree that's at play, but that's just where my mind went.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I wasn't thinking about that, but I think it's very applicable. And I don't know that, it's not like it was some sort of conspiracy necessarily on the part of Christians or pastors or something like that. It's just the effort wasn't made to counter it. And when there's no effort made to counter such a force in that's present in the entire culture until it's addressed, it's going to just continue to organically deteriorate. And I love what you said just a little bit a minute ago. Christians should be the best examples of financial literacy. We
Hmm.
should, and there's no excuse for us to not, and we are not. And just like, in your podcast, pastors should be the ones leading the charge in, by example, and engaging in whatever that may be, whatever they're called to do. Some are called to just only, and when I say just, I mean simply, right? Not
Yeah,
not because
right.
that's a lower calling, but to be single vocation. They're a pastor. That's the place where they draw their paycheck. That's fine. But those who are not should be the first in the wherever they work to be pursuing excellence in all spheres, obviously pastorally. But if you're called to start a business, then start a business. You are called to steward your finances because either way you have money. You have money no matter what you do. We're called to that. Either way you have a body. You have to take care of your health. Either way you have a family. You're called to take care of them, to lead, protect, those types of things. And there's a lot of books out there on, and a lot of resources dedicated toward like helping men with this and that, whether that's, be a better leader and that sort of thing. And I will say, in my opinion, you'd probably agree with me, rather poorly. Um, but those resources are there. However, for like financial literacy in the church, you don't have that many resources, because it's like this thing that hasn't been very properly addressed. And I don't think that pastors know what to do with it in most cases. There is not a whole lot there for them to study on. There's not a whole lot for them to go off of. And the application of proper stewardship of finances is, like I said, it is harder now than it used to be, because of market forces and just because navigating this world has become increasingly complex. And so you can't expect a pastor from the pulpit to have expertise in that area
Well, and
necessarily.
yeah, and I'll take that a step further and say this. If you're a pastor who has a crummy marriage, it's it's very hard for you to get up and preach on how to build a strong marriage. And if you're a pastor who's broke, it's very hard for you to get up and preach a strong message on how to manage finances for the glory of God. This is why I often think that the business community, the entrepreneurs, the business leaders in our churches don't take our pastors very seriously on certain things. There may be a little bit of a lack of respect to some degree, because, and that may be overstating it, but where they don't think you understand their world, pastor, because in many cases they're right, you don't. Um because
Yeah.
you don't know how money works. You don't know how to handle money because that scarcity, poverty thinking has been so ingrained in you because of your upbringing in the church and the years that you've been leading in that space. You have learned to think so small and you're not taking dominion. There's not a pathway forward for you to take dominion financially. So when it comes to you getting up and opening the word of God and speaking finances into the lives of your people, it's not very believable. So
Yeah, you just opened like 5 cans of worms right there.
well,
uh
let's
like
worms.
it's like, well, that there is definitely an issue where, I think that in many churches, the men who are the most aggressively trying to be faithful providers in their families are probably relating the least to their pastors, because a lot of pastors have what I have come to call employee mindset. You show up and you see just what you can get out of the whole deal. You're not really trying to be that productive. You're not trying to make yourself more valuable. You might try to make yourself appear more valuable. That doesn't necessarily mean you are more valuable. And just sort of like show up, let's see what I can get out of this whole thing. And that's the mindset that I think many pastors have adopted because they think like employees. They should be thinking more like entrepreneurs, not in the sense where they're trying to build wealth, but they should be thinking that they should, in terms of building toward the spiritual well-being of their churches. And that may, end up giving them more members. That may end up giving them less, members. I like, as much as maybe some people who listen might not appreciate everything John MacArthur believes or says. One thing I think he's got very right is the pastor should take care of the depth of his ministry, and God will see to the breadth of his ministry.
Well, at the end of the day, it's multiplication it's a biblical idea that it's the parable of the talents. There's an expectation for us to take what God has given us and to manage it in such a way that it grows and that it expands and that it multiplies. And so I'm saying that to that idea of a pastor being entrepreneurial, even if you're not out starting a business in the marketplace and you don't feel called to that, okay, fine. There still is a level of management over the dominion that God has given you, the resources that he's put in your hands, and there's an expectation that you do not take that talent and bury it in the dirt and go, well, we're just going to play it safe. And so
Yeah,
again, I think I want to encourage pastors, and I have a lot of reasons for this, but I want to encourage pastors to multiply financially because I think they're going to be healthier when they do that. I think a pastor who can actually afford to take a vacation, like a real vacation, not a 3-day church conference and call it a vacation where you don't even rest or do anything for your soul. I'm saying a pastor who's able to unplug and go, wherever they are re-energized, whether that's the mountains, the beach, whatever, to go disconnect from your day to day and rest and connect with your family. Like that pastor is going to stay in the fight much longer than the pastor who cannot afford that. That
yeah,
consistent financial pressure. It is a good thing for a pastor not to constantly be under that. We're just one little broken water heater away from another financial crisis. Like those are the things I'm trying to help pastors be set free from. And so I'm going to keep pounding that drum and trying to, rally the troops around that message. Let me ask you this, Justin, if you thought ahead in your world with Dominion Wealth Strategies here for the next 3 to 5 years, and things are just you're just crushing it, like you're doing all the things that you dream of doing. Paint that picture for me. What does that look like, and how is the world changing as a result of you crushing it and having Dominion yourself?
yeah. So it's my 5-year business plan.
No, there you go. You can call it that. That's
Yeah,
an easy way of saying it.
yeah. It's no secret. Um, where I would like to be in 5 years, I won't talk about myself so much as the impact that I've had, I and my associates. So I would like us to be on the lips of everyone in the church who's faithful, as far as the experts, the people to talk to when it comes to stewarding their finances wisely. I want us to be the ones that everybody goes, hey, those are the guys. I met with Dominion. I'm squared away. I'm good. I have an ongoing relationship. We are also working on developing curriculum for churches as well, so that they can do Sunday school things and we can do weekend seminars and things like that, just to try to teach people and put resources in people's hands, have some written material, some video material, that kind of thing. And so because I can do these podcasts and we can, meet and put the put the word out there on social media and stuff. But having books and information products in the hands of people is what we ultimately need to have at some point, just to help spread this message and to affect a real change. Um, so that's a big part of it. As far as the people that I work with personally, I would like to be managing a boatload of wealth that's held by Christians, which is a piece of what we do, specifically because that will allow us to do a number of things. It's sort of an engagement on multiple fronts when it comes to taking dominion in the culture. So, one, when Christians begin to own the majority of shares in large corporations and start voting on who's in the board of directors, then at that point, they won't be able to do stuff like have DEI messaging and homosexual programming and those types of things. We won't have ambiguously sexual characters. We won't have these extremely flawed heroes that are like messed up and there's no real good guy and there's no real bad guy. We
Mhm.
can walk away from that kind of junk. The other thing that it allows us to do is just make a bunch of money. That's what I want Christians to do. I want us to be the stewards of a great deal of wealth so that we can get back to building churches made out of stone and glass so that we can do what they did. And we think we're so sophisticated in America sometimes, I think, because we're all, 1,000 years removed from the Middle Ages. Well, back in the Middle Ages, they were making edifices that were supposed to draw the heart of man into the beauty of God. Like when you walk into those cathedrals, you're supposed to be overwhelmed at their beauty, and they're supposed to make you look upward to God. And people are still getting that feeling today. They still do that. They still have that effect. We don't build those anymore. We don't think like that anymore. And I'm not putting down making a stick built church to meet in because that's what we have to do. It is. But nobody's building stuff like that anymore. Nobody's building an edifice that could stand for thousands of years physically as a testament to God's glory because the men who built it had a greater vision that this would extend beyond their own lifetimes and its impact.
Yeah.
That only comes with extraordinary wealth. It really and a huge shared vision among many Christians. And so that's like in 5 years, that's where I'm thinking is like, okay, so where can we coordinate efforts? Where can we coordinate our efforts to shut down bad messaging where we deem fit? I want to be able to email, everyone whose wealth I'm managing and say, hey, those of you that it's fitting, what do you guys think about buying a bunch of Disney stock this quarter?
Yeah.
Let's do that because we're tired of the messaging. We're not going to cancel the subscriptions. No, who cares about that? We want there to be more subscriptions because we're going to profit off Disney anyway. We're going to make Disney profitable again, and they're going to be messaging. Their messaging is going to be our messaging. I want to take that over eventually. This might take generations. It might take a short time, long time. I don't know. But anyway, that's sort of where I see this going. We're at the beginning of sort of a wave of awareness about what we're doing, and I want that momentum to continue so that like we are on the lips of everyone in the church when it comes to, hey, these are the guys to talk to about how to make this happen.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, man, because it helps kind of put clarity to it. Helps kind of paint a picture of like this is what Dominion looks like, and hopefully there's some pastors hearing this saying maybe their strategy isn't going to be the exact same, but to like let's start dreaming big again. Let's get on offense. Let's stop playing defense so much. And again, it's really hard to play offense when you're broke. It's hard to play offense when you can't even afford to get in the game to begin with. So I love what your message is about. I love the work that you're doing. Maybe I got just a couple more quick questions for you. One is this: speak to that pastor that's listening to this today that's on the fence. Maybe they've been kind of in the orbit of EntrePastors for a little while. They've been listening, they've been curious, they're leaning in. If you could just give them that nudge that they need, whatever kick in the pants they need to kind of get off that fence and move in a direction, what would you say to encourage them, kick them in the pants? You get to choose whatever you want to do, but what would you say to that pastor today to kind of move them in the right direction?
I would start off, if I was talking to that pastor, I'd ask him start off with a question actually is, do you find yourself struggling to relate to the aggressive men in your church who are engaging in the workplace, who are engaging in commerce, who are engaging in business? Do you struggle to relate to them? Because that's a sign that it's time to make a change. Because these men are walking forward faithfully, and if they see you as a pastor as someone they can't relate to, then that should be, I don't want to say a red flag in the sense of like you're a failure, but a red flag in the sense of here's your opportunity for improvement. And yeah, it might seem scary. It's very unconventional. You weren't probably told in seminary you're going to go to church, you're going to get paid by your salary by your church and then go start a business or whatever. But the reality is, what better way? What better way to show God's character in your community or in whatever sphere that may be where you're engaging in business? What better way to show that this is excellence? This is what a godly man is like to do, to transact business with. And start. Like, you have to just start. That it might seem scary, it might seem intimidating, it might seem, however, whatever the barriers might be, go talk to the men in your church who've started businesses. Go to them and say, look, I don't know how to do this. I've been basically an employee. How do I go about this? How do I even find what works for me? Ask those guys. They're making money. They know how to make money, and they'll probably be able to give you great advice, help you find the right thing, and of course, listen to John too, because he does this for a living. But like, engage to talk to the men who have gone before you and done this. Just like when you became a pastor, you had mentors and you were discipled and you went to seminary, whatever training you got, you were trained by men who knew better than you. Now, when it comes time to like transact business, go to the men in your church that you already know have built wealth, have built businesses, and talk to them about how they do it fundamentally. What are the fundamentals here? Ask those questions, and they'll probably be very happy to have those conversations, because I will bet you that if you a have not had this mindset before, they'll be happy to welcome you into the circle.
Mm. I'm curious what you'd say to this, Justin, when you mentioned a minute ago, like, are you relating or to the aggressive businessmen in your church? I'm paraphrasing. I'm not getting an exact quote there, but when you said that, my mind went to this. I wonder how many pastors out there don't even have any of those in their church. If we were to say, pastor, name them, who are they? Who are the aggressive men that are taking dominion in for the kingdom in the business world and whatnot? Like, can you name them in your church? What would you say to that pastor that would look around and go, I don't have any of those in my church?
I would say then that might be a sign that your church isn't a friendly place to them. Maybe not, and that it should be a little. It should be a wake up call to the opportunity that maybe you should be the one setting the example, so that the men in your church will also follow suit.
I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, I was with Richard Blackaby, the son of Henry Blackaby. Am I saying that name? Henry Blackaby was the one that wrote Desiring God, right? No, he wrote a major book, but it's his son Richard Blackaby. So forgive me, all of you Blackaby fans. But Richard, I never met the dad, but Richard I met, and he was telling me this story that he leads these Bible studies on a quarterly basis for these massive business owners. Like, to be in this group, you have to have a company that's doing over 100 million a year or more. And
Yeah,
he was talking about he'd fly into the Dallas airport once a quarter to gather this group of men and to pour into them for 2 days of just spiritual development and discipleship. And he asked this group of men, he said, for those of you that attend a church, he said, what do your churches ask of you to do? Like, do they ever ask you to get involved? And to a man, the answer was they might let us volunteer to clean the building. They let us hand out bulletins at the front door. At no point is that church asking them, teach us, show us what you can show us. And I don't know, like, I think that could be maybe some pride, like, hey, I'm the pastor, I need to be the one who knows everything. It could be a
yeah.
a source of like, I'm insecure. I don't know what to do with you because I feel really insecure. But I was sad when he shared that story with me. I was like, man, we need to do better, church. So anyway, I hope there are those types of men sitting in churches across our country. But I'm afraid it's more of what you said, that we have created an environment in the church that is not welcoming and not friendly and not really connecting with that dynamic. And I think we need to change that. If we're ever going to see the vision that you're talking about, we have to change that.
Yeah. I think that the men who are doing that kind of work are, in many churches, they probably feel like outsiders,
Yeah.
honestly. They probably don't feel like engaging because a lot of the messaging that they're seeing is very feminized to them, it's very sterilized to them, and counter to the way that they're living their lives. Not that it's like advocating for sin, but counter to like getting after it, counter to men who are willing to go to to extremes by like social like society standards, but not extremes to biblical standards, in my opinion, who are willing to
Wow.
put serious effort into becoming exceptional providers for their families. Men
Yeah.
who are willing to become exceptional at business, who are willing to become to pursue excellence in that realm, sort of as a means unto itself. Those men are, I think, generally feeling fairly disregarded and fairly disconnected. And as a critique, I think that a lot of the what I would call them like the young, reformed, I think could be middle aged too, that they're reading books and that's great, and they like to make their arguments on Facebook and all that kind of thing. But what are you doing if that's you? What are you doing? You reading those books is good and wholesome, but if it's not accompanied by action and engagement in something that's meaningful and going to change lives in some way, what's the point? You might as well go play on your Xbox.
Yeah. I just heard a coach of mine speaking into my life. I've never heard this stated this way. It was kind of interesting. He was making the point that Jesus' inner circle of Peter, James, and John represented three dynamics that we need a mixture of those within the leadership of our church. And Peter was a doer, James was a thinker, and John was a lover. So you've got kind of the muscle, you've got the mind, and you've got the heart involved. And if we fall too far on any of those extremes, or if we're lacking the others, we'll kind of end up very unbalanced. And where my mind went a minute ago when you were saying that, with that profile of someone that's just all into the books and the reading and the intellectual side of it, that's great. I'm a reader, I'm a learner. But if that never gets translated into some of the doing, we're missing it. Like, a thinker that just sits and thinks is not really helping anybody. So if you're wired to be a thinker, that's great, but then we got to get you partnered up with some doers. It's time for the Church of Jesus to do some stuff. And and not to forget the love along the way. That's my probably one of my bigger weaknesses, is to care enough about people to slow down and have the compassion to love them along the way, and not just simply run them over with a bulldozer because I'm so busy doing something. So there's something there for all of us, that regardless of how you're wired. But yeah,
Of
thinking,
course,
just
yeah.
being a thinker, is not going to help fix anything. We got to do some stuff.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Well, let me wrap up with this here, Justin. If someone wanted to connect with you to either inquire more about your services, or to carry on this conversation, or whatever they may need from you, what's the best way for people to find you and reach out?
Yeah, the best way is our website, which is at reformed.money. You could do www.reformed.money or reformed.money. We're also on Facebook, Dominion Wealth Strategists. If you just search for that, you'll find us. That's probably our biggest social media presence. We do have an X account and Instagram, but they're not that active yet. No YouTube yet, so we'll see about that in the future. But the best is reformed.money if you want to book a meeting with us, and if you want to reach out to me, anyone could find me on Facebook as well. Or you can message the page on Facebook. Either I'm going to answer that, or my partner would be answering that, or one of our social media people.
Awesome. Well, man, we'll put the links to all that in the show notes for this episode, and I hope someone does reach out and connect. And I'm grateful for your time, grateful for the investment you've made into our audience here today. So before I wrap up here's my last question. Is there anything that you were hoping I asked you today that I didn't ask you that you really wanted to get off your chest? Now's your chance to do it.
No, I mean, I think that was all the that was everything. I just really wanted to communicate to especially I know this is for the men, and most of my focus is on helping men too. Do not be afraid of your calling. You have been called to do. You have been called to take dominion. There is a sphere over which God has called you to take dominion. And if you are not, then you're disobeying the calling of God. It's a divine mandate. I can't tell you what that is in the workplace. Only you really can figure that out for yourself, but you have to do so. There are other callings, but there are also other universal areas that we have to take dominion over. And the one that I'm focused on is finances. Make sure that you're being a steward. Remember the parable of the talents. The servant that hid his money away and buried it did not do well. He was not looked upon kindly by his master. But those that went and multiplied what they were given were rewarded. That is a parable. It tells us how God looks at us and the resources we are given.
So good. Man, this has been fun hanging out, Justin. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again in the near future. All right, man?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors Podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.